Thank you, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight and to see you all. And I also want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Gadigal land and to extend respect to elders past and present of the Eora Nation. I also want to acknowledge all the fantastic troublemakers who are in this chat. So many of my favourite troublemakers are here. You know who you are. Thank you for, holding this vision of what future we could have, that's so close, that's within reach. And it's so hard to stay optimistic at a time like this when, we got 633 today. We know that the school attendance in those lockdown suburbs is lower than in other parts of Sydney. We know who's losing their jobs. We know who's most affected. As Alice said, how disproportionately this lockdown and this situation we're in is being played out across our cities. It's so hard, even for like a dyed-in-the-wool optimist like me. I find this really hard right now. But seeing you all here, keeping the candle burning, really keeps me going too. And so I want to thank you all for doing this and for being here. And I just want to build on something that was just said there, where Alice said that Kate says that we're building on these outdated models and measures. I want to say that we're actually building on short-term memory models, because this way that we do things right now is not the way that things have always been done. They're not the way that things are done everywhere. And, First Nations people didn't work with these models that we're working with in this short-term image of history. And this extractive, individualistic, and completely unsustainable model that we have today is a blip in history. It will not last if we change it, and it is not the way things have always been or always have to be. And we have to spread that message to everyone. I want to share with you a few things that I think we're working on that give me confidence and optimism and a sense of purpose at the City of Sydney. I want to break it down in the following ways. First, I want to talk about what we prioritise. Then I want to talk about who sets the priorities. And then I want to talk about some opportunities in this moment of flux, things that we can grab a hold of. And as people say, never let a good crisis go to waste, and jump on that moment and make some change happen. And I'm going to try and do all of this in like 8 minutes. So let's see how we go. David is laughing because he knows that I've never done anything in 8 minutes. So there we go. Let me start. What we prioritise. We need new metrics. We need new KPIs for society, right? And we've got so many thoughtful people like Kate who are giving us great examples for that. There's a model that I'm focused on here at the City of Sydney, which is community wealth building. Okay, hands up, who's across community wealth building? I know a few of you guys in this chat are, right? So community wealth building is a practice that's had its roots in lots of different parts of the world, in Cleveland, in Preston, in a few places like that. But actually, a woman I spoke to, I wrote a book called Glimpses of Utopia, and one of the most clarifying conversations I had was with a Lakota woman named Stephanie Gutierrez, who told me that actually community wealth building is just orienting society around everyone's benefit, essentially. It's just the way that things have always been done in her culture. And so she, like the donut has translated community wealth building into the Lakota way of community wealth building. The key idea there is to move from an extractive model that takes the wealth that workers, that communities, that artists, that people make in a place and extracts it to some foreign location or some other location or to some hedge fund, you name it. And what it does is it is a more transparent and accountable way of tracking the money that is spent in a community. So I have advocated for, and we now have a draft proposal for community wealth building policy in the City of Sydney. It will be released soon, and I want everyone on this call to please read it and contribute to it. Because if you do that, you can help us set different priorities for how we spend money. Now, something that I've become quite passionate about, which is a surprise to me, is procurement. Procurement is one of the most boring words, but one of the most useful terms, I have to say, in government. At the City of Sydney, we spend $540 million a year outside of wages which sounds like a lot until you realise that the New South Wales government spends $35 billion a year, and they're the biggest customer in the country. If we made sure that every cent that is spent in our name as citizens goes to a socially, ethically, environmentally responsible and transparent organisation where the wealth was stayed in communities, went to living wages, we would change lives, right? Yes, Sarah, procurement is my fave too. So let's think about how we spend money and how does money move and flow in our community. Let's put that in the donut, in our work on the donut. Second, I'm going to move super quickly. Who sets the priorities? Because you can have these great ideas, but unfortunately, politics is what dictates which great policy ideas become a reality and which ones become cool, abstract models, shelfware, as people describe it. Politics really matters. It's why I'm bothering to do it. It's not for entertainment, let me tell you. So I need every one of you to be active citizens, right? And being an active citizen doesn't just mean voting or writing in signing a change.org petition. It means showing up in the boring and specific ways that governments hear, right? Community consultation, community feedback. We need people to be active voices of yes, active voices of change. And you know what? My inbox does not look like that, my friends. I need all of you to come and live in my inbox next to all those people who keep telling me no cycleways, no trees instead of car parks, no affordable housing. I hear from those people, but I don't hear from people like you with the donut ideas in mind. So I'm working on something called Yimby Sydney, which is a movement called Yes in My Backyard, people who are advocates for positive change, people who email and get in touch, and I can help give them direction on ways that they can have feedback in ways that government can hear. But another thing that we did at the City of Sydney that helped us set priorities differently was a citizens jury process. It's yimbysydney.something. Yeah, you'll find it. I'll put it in the chat when I work it out. Thank you, Sarah. So we did an awesome thing in late 2019, which was a citizens jury, which is a deliberative and participatory democracy process. So the first thing I said, we had to set new metrics. The second thing is we need new mechanisms for decision making, right? We actually need to hear from a representative group of our society, because people who you elect to represent you, present company accepted, don't usually look like us, right? They're usually older, richer and whiter than most of us, right? They usually have specific interests that they're representing. And if we actually heard from our neighbours, if we actually heard from people like us on this call, we would get very different policies out of our politicians. So a citizens jury process is something that I think would be useful in your donut considerations, in your baking. And what the Citizens Jury told us in 2019, basically we worked with this group called the New Democracy Foundation. They sent out 10,000 letters across the city. From that, they selected 50 people, 50 citizens who were representative by age, gender, location, education of the community. It's similar to a citizens' assembly, a bit smaller. And those people then dedicated time, called in experts, went through 2,500 submissions from the community, a whole bunch of work. And they set priorities for us for the next 30 years, essentially, at the City of Sydney. And their policy document is so, it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. Because what they told us, no, I don't want to restart my computer right now. Why? Why does it always do that? What they told us was that we didn't just need to have a sustainable Sydney. We need to have a regenerative Sydney, right? These are our fellow citizens. When you disintermediate the media moguls and the minor, the marginal seats, you actually get the generosity, the courage, and the vision of people, which is to have that city that gives back more than it takes, that cleans the air and water, that brings everyone in. There is so much, and I really commend that report to this group. I think it's a wonderful starting point. So we need new metrics, we need new processes and new mechanics for getting those new metrics into government, into governance. And then I want to talk to you really quickly about two opportunities in this moment of flux. One that I'm working on is about carving out space for a fairer city, right? So we talked about, Alice mentioned a few of the things that we could focus on: energy, housing, food, greenery, canopy. There's some of the things we should focus on. In Sydney, affordability, in Australia, affordability, space, housing, it is just broken. And I see Louise Crabtree's on this call, so shout out to the legend, because, you know, we need people redesigning the model of housing and how it is done in this country. That is a long-term game, and we need to work on it. I'm doing a short-term intervention to that end, which is something called meanwhile use. So I'm working with Women's Community Shelters and City West, which is a community housing provider, and trying to work with student housing providers to actually get a temporary use of international student accommodation for women's emergency shelters. I cannot tell you how hard it has been, but it is exactly the kind of thing we need to do. We need to see the cracks, we need to dive in, and we need to just, you know, plant some seeds in those cracks, right? Yes, absolutely. Shout out to built environment people, and shout out to legal people and financial people who work with built environment people, because we need to redesign the model, right? So that's one idea. So meanwhile use is something to explore. And then, I mean, the city itself as an organisation does some really fantastic things, and I want to acknowledge the work of our CEO, Monica Baroni. She's been really passionate about a glass circular economy project that she's been working on with 11 other councils in Sydney, which is called Paving the Way. And essentially, and this I think is the lesson for the Doughnut, and I will stop very soon. What they've done is to work collaboratively as both buyers and sellers, right? So local government collects a lot of glass, and that glass needs to have somewhere to go. There's nowhere to recycle that into to have circularity. So then they've worked with transport to get approval for that glass to be used as roadways or as a component to roadway material. Then they've worked with suppliers to be able to process that glass into a workable material. And then they've committed to buy it. And so this is what can happen if people work together across the 31 councils that make up Greater Sydney to buy, to sell differently, and to create markets that wouldn't be created by the market, right? So these are some of the ways that I think we can have really meaningful collaborative intervention and to reset to meet the needs of all while living within the needs of the living planet. And thank you all for being here. Thank you all for lifting all of our spirits through your work as well. Thank you. Thank you for having me.